Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events podcast. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co-hosts. And in today's episode, you're hearing just from me. We're shaking things up a little bit for some solo episodes. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about where nonprofits should spend their time when planning fundraising events. You know that if I have time to do a solo episode, I'm going to be talking about nonprofit events. And so let's go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome to our solo episode. It's just you and me today. We miss Logan, but we are excited to talk about some nonprofit event stuff today. And so we're talking about where nonprofits should spend their time when planning fundraising events. And on this podcast, we've talked about a handful of different fundraising and nonprofit topics, whether it has been me when I've done a solo episode or Logan and I together as well. And so I'm going to call those out for you now in case this is an area of interest for you. We have episode number 4 from the very beginning, fundraising event strategies for nonprofits. We have episode 67, the purpose of fundraising events. Episode 101, how to host a successful gala tips and tricks. Episode 118, how to fundraise at your next event. Episode 154, fundraising program and scripting tips and tricks. And just a couple more. Episode 173, how to make more money at your fundraising event. And episode 192, at the starting line, a step-by-step guide to kick off your nonprofit event planning. A lot of these sound semi-similar, but there's different stories in each of them. And also, we've had this podcast for a handful of years now. So as we get more into other episodes, there's new stories, lessons learned that we share. And so I would say applicable to go back and hear all of them. But this is another one for you today, episode 243. We're talking fundraising. So we are excited to get into it. So when I work with nonprofits on their fundraising events, it seems like time is one of their most valuable assets. They usually just have very limited time. It's one of their limited resources. And so I want to have a little bit of real talk to start off about capacity. So who's actually planning this nonprofit event in these situations? Is it the staff, the board, volunteers or committees, maybe all of the above? And these nonprofits might have a big team, or maybe it's just them, just one person. And so where should these people, whoever they are that are involved, be spending their time? And ask yourself these questions. What will bring the greatest return on investment for this event? And where will these individuals feel most valued? So those are two things we want to think about at the beginning. But let me go ahead and paint a picture for you. I'm going to talk through 2 different scenarios, and you may or may not resonate with one of these. So in scenario 1, let's say you're 4 months from your annual gala. You're kicking off with consistent planning meetings with the team, but you already started working a little bit on sponsorship and filling tables. So that's already underway. But now we're going to get heavier into logistics because you're 4 months out from the gala. So you spend the next 3 planning meetings talking about the theme for your VIP reception. This is not a good use of time. Part of this comes down to team and meeting management, but rather instead, here's what I suggest. Your theme should be one of the early on discussions when also considering your event goals. So ideally, we're weaving your mission into your theme. So we want to be intentional about that from the very beginning because it will influence the vibe and all the decisions that you make, the flow, the vendors booked, the guest experience, the program, you get the idea. So my point is, it should be decided probably more than 4 months before what you're doing there. And so there is more intention, and it doesn't need to be discussed every single week what that theme is. So the reason I paint this picture is because what I found is when we get into these planning meetings, there are a lot of discussions about things that one could argue make less of an impact than other things. So let's make these concise, quick decisions about things like that and focus on what's going to give us a better return on investment. Okay, and I hope that doesn't seem harsh. We're having some real talk with each other. So let's go into scenario number 2. Scenario 2, you are 9 months out from your gala. It's your little gala baby, you could say. You got 9 months to plan this thing, and you want to book everything right now. You want the venue and the vendors locked in 9 months out. And I have to say, this is actually very admirable, because places and people do book out, especially places. Venues definitely book out. So this is, I think, is actually great. But so let's say you book your venue and you book the largest ballroom that they have available just based on your past year's numbers. Then you book the caterer based on last year's counts, and you book your DJ. And hey, maybe you even book an event planner. And none of this is bad. None of this is bad at all. But the fact that you're getting ahead of things is really awesome. But first, again, have you had conversations yet about your budget, about your fundraising goals 9 months out, your mission and theme for the year? So I would suggest that you really start there and make a plan about how you're going to be spending your money and where it matters, and getting estimates that you base your decisions on that are actually accurate. I think a lot of nonprofits make assumptions that we're just going to do the same thing that we did the year prior, but the problem with that is that people react differently to your event every year. You hope you have the same amount, but you might not. Obviously, at some point you have to make that decision so that you can book it no matter what. But I'm just saying, have these conversations that are more intentional at the beginning versus just assuming you're going to do the same thing last year. Okay, so let's unpack this just a little bit more. What percentage of planning time do you think should be realistically spent on relationship building versus logistics? And then where should nonprofits focus their efforts to maximize return on investment? And what I would say is that sponsorships are really one of the best ways that you could spend your time to maximize that return on investment. And I would say maybe even challenge yourself. Can you pay for the event before it even happens? Because sponsorship is a wonderful way to try to do that. And it sounds easier than it is. I totally get it. Getting sponsorships can be hard. It's a long process. And if you don't do it soon enough, sometimes you miss some company deadlines for when they submit their their donations and they decide where their contributions are going. And so I know that it's easier said than done, but truly sponsorships are a wonderful way to spend your time to maximize the return on investment. So when we work with nonprofits, normally what we tell them is that our job is to take logistics off your plate so that you can focus on relationship building. Now, if you're a nonprofit and you're doing something internal, you could still have that situation, but maybe it's someone particular who is planning the logistics so that you as the development director could focus on getting those donations. Or maybe it's a certain period of time. If it's only you, you're going to really focus in on sponsorships and donations at this time, and then you're going to move to logistics at this time. But the point is that there's some area of focus around this relationship building, because that really is what's going to make a difference in your event. So when you're thinking about relationship building, also think of pre-committed gifts. This is another area that's very useful to be spending your time before you dive deep into the logistics as a nonprofit. And so those pre-committed gifts are ones, it depends your kind of event, obviously. But let's just say, once again, it's a gala or an auction because they're so common. You are working on getting people who are going to give a certain amount of money at the event, but you're getting them to pre-commit to do that before they are in the room. Because the reality is, once people get in the room, it's highly unpredictable about what's actually going to happen. We can look at data from past years, but there are so many things that influence a person and if they're going to be giving the same amount or a different amount than the year prior. And so we try to control that a little bit by talking to people about getting their pre-committed gifts before, or agreeing to that before they come to the event. Now, there's this idea that we hear come up, fairly often in events and business, which is just, how do you balance spending money to make money? And so I would say to ask yourself, what is going to add value and contribute to the mission, or give you your time back? So those are kind of the two things. Add value and contribute to the mission, or give you your time back so that you can work on securing donations. And then the thing is, once you commit to that, you say, okay, well, I'm going to spend money to make money. You have to actually spend the time to do the thing that you need to do since you offloaded the other work. You hear what I'm saying? And so make sure you're closing the loop on that return on investment for yourself, because if you are going to hire an event planner, then you should spend time on relationship building activities. And that means you should actually be meeting with donors and doing sponsorships. So there's a little bit there. Now let's go ahead and talk about the program. We are going to talk about some metrics from the program and from the event that you can use to tell if your event as a nonprofit is successful. And I want to pause for a minute. We have a lot of event professionals that listen to this podcast, obviously. So this is for you if you help with nonprofit events, or if you are a nonprofit that through SEO and all the wonderful things, stumbled across this episode. So these are things that nonprofits can measure, but event professionals, you can help nonprofits measure these as well. So I'm just going to list them off to, once again, to figure out if your event is worth it. So you can look at the net revenue. This is the total revenue minus all the expenses, including staff time. That's like a really important thing that a lot of nonprofits don't include, but you need to include how long it takes your team to do something because they are getting paid for that work. Or maybe you're working with volunteers, but regardless, time is an asset. So make sure you include staff time in that net revenue. Next is the cost to raise $1. This is something that I really, really love to talk to nonprofit about. So basically, how much does it cost to raise $1 throughout the event? And that's a wonderful thing. Depending on the event, that looks a little bit different. For some more fundraisers or community building activities, you might spend more money. You might get closer like to 60 cents to $1. But if you're really having a good return on investment, and it's usually closer to like 30, 40 cents to raise $1. Next, look at the revenue per attendee. So this helps assess whether the audience was the right fit. Next, look at new donors acquired, so especially first-time and younger donors. Then you can look at donor retention rate. So did event attendees give again afterward? Then you can look at like an upgrade rate perhaps. So like, did existing donors increase their giving? Was there a monthly giving increase? Monthly giving is a huge thing that you can tie into events. It's very clever. And then the silent auction return on investment. Let's say that you are still doing silent auctions. There are some reports that you can pull from certain auction platforms that tell you the percentage of the return on investment, what the item value is versus what it sold for. And then you can consider how much time it takes you to procure that item and do all the things, because yes, you're not paying anything for it, but you are spending a lot of time. You're printing things, you're setting it up, you're doing the thing. So that ROI report, I think, is very, very explanatory if you are trying to figure out if you need to do a silent auction or not. But this is also why an auction platform matters. And a lot of these things, this data that we've mentioned, it needs to be tracked in some way, whether it's through your donor database or through an auction platform. And if you are, grassroots and you don't have these resources, I would challenge you to figure out how you can track some of these things, because this is how you figure out if your event's worth it. So it's very important to have some way to reflect on this. The other thing to consider with metrics is if staff hours, how many staff hours were invested. This includes, planning, execution, and follow-up, volunteer effectiveness. Were volunteers empowered, or were they kind of overburdened the whole time? And then also burnout risk. This is like less metric driven, but did the event drain the team, or did it energize them? And what can you do moving forward? So where do volunteer committees make sense? We're kind of shifting gears a little bit. And then where can these committees slow things down? Committees, we understand, they are a free resource to nonprofits, which is valuable. I would say that these committees are helpful when they are opening doors to sponsors, donors, and partners. They also can lend some credibility in areas they are representative of your organization and they support it. And so that might bring others in their circles to support it as well. And also some of them can help expand your reach to networks that you can't access. So if it's like a lawyer who's on your board, that kind of expands the reach into that world and then brings their expertise so that you can use that as well. They're also good at stress testing some ideas. So just from like a donor or even attendee perspective, you can say, well, what do you think about this event idea? To an extent, right? But they are good at stress testing sometimes. And then, like I said about the bringing like a lawyer in to bring their advice, other things you can think about is someone who's really great at finance, marketing, production, DEI, logistics, just all of those things and how you can use them and their skills. But volunteer committees sometimes slow things down when they need to decide on the creative ideas. Now, I think every time I've worked with a committee, there's always someone on the committee who really loves the decor piece. And so we're like, great, you take it, because there are other things we want to spend our time on. And so there is value in that. I'm not saying that there's not. But when it's a group consensus on deciding what the centerpiece is, that's not a good use of time. Assign a committee member just to handle it. And I would say same with just any other kind of like elements like that you want oversight on, but they can really run with it and have a good time while you focus on the relationships. Volunteer committees can also slow us down when we're choosing vendors. And so I would, present the facts and have them decide, or you decide, but it's not just like a big open conversation. And also just like consensus seeking in general. So a misunderstanding about who's in charge of the committee. So some clear committee leadership so that decisions can be made. understanding that maybe not every decision needs to be made as a committee. Maybe it's more like go do the work and then report back. So a lot of times these volunteer committees are used because the teams are small. And so how can small teams avoid burnout during event planning? The first thing I would suggest is to have clear roles, then to define the top 3 priorities from the team. So is it revenue? Is it attendee experience? Is it sponsor satisfaction? So as a team, what are those top 3 priorities? And then from there, you can identify gaps and invest in filling them. Ironically, there is also an extent where I would suggest avoiding using volunteers for some critical roles. And that seems contrary because we're talking about how small teams can avoid burnout, or, well, having help helps, except when it doesn't. When volunteers sometimes, they have other things going on in their lives. They don't show up, they don't fulfill the thing they committed to. And that is really challenging when you already are burnt out and have a limited resource yourself, because it's sometimes easier just to do it yourself, or, actually have somebody who's going to do it by paying them. And so I would say that, that's why not using volunteers for critical roles unless you can highly, highly rely on them, so that you can actually turn that part of your brain off and move on to something else. And then just something to consider as a small team is, will guests notice that if it's not perfect? Or what do you really want to focus perfection on that night? So think about that guest experience. Another thing to consider is when you make decisions, think about, does this directly impact the revenue, the safety, or like the flow of the event? Is it worth the stress at 10 p.m. or at midnight? And if the answer is no, then just let it go or move on. Just figure out where you really need to focus your time. So, with this in mind, we're talking about time again. How much time should be spent on donor stewardship after the event? So, we talk about the event, we talk about pre event, we talk about on site, but we don't often talk about what happens after everybody goes home. And so, we're going to have a dedicated conversation about that right now. So, donor stewardship after the event, I think this could look a lot different depending on how big your event is, how many donors you have, what your community looks like, what your team looks like. But I would say you could probably estimate to spend at least 30 hours on donor stewardship that has to do specifically with the event. So within the first, these are just suggestions, but also generally best practices. The first 48 to 72 hours, this could be a great time to send personalized thank you emails or texts, especially to top donors or sponsors or hosts or those people who you think you would like to give some quick thanks to. Also, this is a great time for some quick social recognition or a thank you. We've had some organizations who send like a video out on social media from their executive director just saying thank you, some type of recognition socially that the event happened. Hey, thanks. And here we are. Then in week 1 to 2 after the event, this is where you can make some phone calls to major donors, to table captains, to sponsors. And don't skip this step. I know sometimes, depending on who you are, phone calls maybe aren't the vibe, but they really are a wonderful way to surprise people. When I worked for a nonprofit, we encouraged the board members to call people and just say thank you, not ask for anything. And the responses from folks were crazy. They were like, "You're just calling to say thank you? Oh my gosh, yeah, no problem. You're welcome." We don't just call and thank people very often without asking for something in return. So it's a nice exercise to do. Then in week 3 through 6, so you're a little bit farther out from the event, but this is where you continue doing your donor follow-ups. Maybe you had a conversation on site with somebody. You're going to go to lunch with them. You're going to continue to figure out how they can be involved in your organization. But you're spending that time making the plan so you don't forget about it, and neither do they. So here are some mistakes that you could try to avoid. Try not to treat all donors the exact same, in the sense of just a blanket email. Like, do some individual outreach, and you can decide what level you want to do that on. I think that we should be very comfortable thanking people who give $50 and people who give $50,000, because we all are giving at a different capacity. So thanking everybody is important. It's just, the point is you're doing some individual everybody in one way or another instead of one blanket statement. Also, waiting too long to have perfect data is hard. A lot of times you can pull certain reports and things like that after the event, but some of them take time to figure out the results. And so start kind of looking at that analytically as soon as you can to see how some of this actually panned out. And then also sharing early impact is wonderful. And so I would say share early impact instead of waiting. And that early impact can be whatever you want it to be. You could say how much money you raised. You could say because of you, we're able to support these programs this coming year. It doesn't always have to be directly like a number, a money amount. You could share the story in a lot of different ways. And then also, this is a great time during this donor stewardship post event to ask questions about the event. You could do a survey. Surveys are hard. Sometimes you have to get a good response rate to like really hear people's opinion, but just start asking around like what stood out to them about the event, get some feedback. So, hopefully, when you're listening to this, you're not too overwhelmed. I think by the end of your event, you're absolutely going to need some time off. You're going to need a break. You're going to need to take a nap. And after this episode, you might feel like you have to take a nap because there's a lot that's riding on you in this event. But event professionals, if you're listening to this, let's continue to think of ways that we can support nonprofits in their events. And then, nonprofit leader, if you're listening to this, I hope you found a little tips and tricks that you could use to apply to your next event. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And because you're just with me today, I have our bonus tip today. So I did make it semi-relevant to the topic. Nonprofits, it's actually very relevant. Nonprofits, ask your vendors for a discount because the worst they can say is no, right? So I'm not saying you need to hound them for a discount, but when you're booking them, just say, by the way, do you have a nonprofit rate? Or would you consider giving a discount? Easy ask. That's it. You don't have to say any more and just see what they say because many of them are going to say yes or they're going to give you some discount. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't ask. So that's my bonus tip for today. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can also connect with me and Logan directly on LinkedIn. We love to hear from you. Just make sure you mention that you heard about us from the podcast so we know that you are a real person. And if you want more Better Events content, you're welcome to join our private community on Substack. And just thank you so much again for listening and all of your support. And we will be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.